1692 means we got shots fired at 4:15 ASF.
Well, we're learning the brother of the Las Vegas gunman, Stephen Paddock, has been arrested for possession of child pornography. Bruce Paddock was picked up in Los Angeles as part of a police task force operation. Meanwhile, we're getting another look at that mass shooting that killed 58 people earlier this month, this time from a new perspective. It's been nearly a month since the massacre. The New York Times has stitched together a new timeline of what could have happened that night. Different bits of evidence and video pieced together in the hopes of getting a clearer picture of the shooting. Our Jamie Yukas has more.
The New York Times investigation says the shooting started at 10:05, matching the investigators' timeline. And after some initial single shots, automatic gunfire can be heard with Jason Aldean on stage. But at 10:06 p.m., 1 minute into the attack, the Times says Stephen Paddock wounds Mandalay Bay security guard Jesus Campos in the hallway. This contradicts investigators' latest timeline, which said Paddock first shot Campos and then began to shoot into the crowd uninterrupted. It's one of the many questions being raised by a team of digital investigators at the New York Times, which used 30 videos to create a timeline.
Ours is not the definitive picture of what happened. More information will emerge, but it does give us new insights into what happened.
Senior story producer Malachi Brown.
We analysed every single burst of gunfire, which had its own fingerprint.
36 seconds after security guard Campos radioed in, came a second round of automatic gunfire into the crowd of the Route 91 Harvest Festival. There is just a 17-second lull before a third burst of gunfire. And only 20 seconds later, a fourth burst. The New York Times counts more than 900 rounds in all into the crowd. At 10:10, muffled gunfire is heard from a taxi driver's cell phone video, indicating that the shooter might have been firing into the hallway again. What's unclear is why officers wouldn't arrive on the 31st floor for another 2 minutes, and not until 10:22 to the 32nd floor.
Where are the cops at?
A full 7 minutes after the shooting started, taxi driver Corey Langdon questions why there are no officers or panic outside Mandalay Bay.
Everybody's just standing around.
More than 3 weeks after the shooting, there are still many unanswered questions, like what was Stephen Paddock's motivation? Why did he allegedly shoot himself? And why are there still so many questions surrounding the timeline? We reached out to the Las Vegas Sheriff's Office for clarification. They tell us there's no investigative update at this time. Jamie Yukas, CBS News, Los Angeles. I want to bring in Malachi Brown. He's a senior story producer at the New York Times, and he worked on this timeline. Malachi, it's so fascinating. What did you hope that you would learn from creating this new timeline?
Well, very little was still unknown about what transpired that terrible night. There were shifting timelines as to the start of the event, the police response, and still very little detail in those 10 minutes of the attack about how it unfolded. And in the absence of evidence being provided by authorities, we turned to cell phone footage filmed by dozens of eyewitnesses to see if we could, determine some more about what actually transpired that night.
How did you get the cell phone footage? How did you source this material?
We sourced some of it from wires like AP and Storyful, who are specialists in verifying this type of footage. But we also trawled through social media websites ourselves, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and other platforms, and we gathered as much visual evidence of that night as possible.
When you're using open source information like this, how can you specifically be sure that the information you're getting is accurate, especially when you're constructing a timeline?
Yeah, it's never one piece of evidence. It's the collection of all of it and what that can tell you. And in this case, location was quite easy to verify because there were various different angles inside the festival. There was some videos from over at the hotel, and we could pinpoint using Google Street View the exact point where those cameras were recording. And then there were things like the bursts of audio, which really gave us our timeline. Every single burst of gunfire had its own fingerprint, and that's the pattern of the rate of bullets, the gaps when the gunman stopped shooting, the intervals between bursts. And by lining all of those up, we were able to reconstruct the entire 10 minutes of the assault in video.
There's also been a lot of fascination over the silence between those gun bursts. Have you learned anything about what the gunman may have been doing during that period?
What we know is that around the time the shooting started, that a hotel security officer, Jesus Campos, arrived in the hallway that the gunman's room was on, and the gunman was alerted to him and fired down the hallway. And sometime later he was joined by a hotel engineer, Stephen Shook, in the hallway, and he was also fired upon. So there appeared to be multiple times when the gunman was distracted from his target of the festival and fired down the hallway. There was also, in our burst analysis of all the bursts of fire, one outlier. There was a camera filming right beside the gunman, where we hear very loud blasts of fire, and then followed by very dull, hollow gunfire. And cameras rolling in the festival at that time didn't pick up that burst of fire, which suggests, in addition to analysis that we did on the audio, that he's firing indoors, and perhaps that's one moment where again he turned down the hallway and fired at those two men taking cover.
We haven't gotten a lot of video and information. They've been great, Metropolitan Police in Las Vegas, about holding daily briefings, but we haven't had a lot of materials come from them. How helpful were they in constructing this timeline for you?
We didn't consult with the police apart from the official statements that they're putting out, and using the information from that. Our reporters in Las Vegas also have their own sources familiar with the case, and they were providing information through this investigation. I was keeping in contact with them. And then we were also, for the audio analysis, talking to former Marines who are on staff at the New York Times, who were able to analyze the audio of that gunfire.
What are the unanswered questions that you still have for this timeline?
What the gunman was doing in those intervals is part of it. One of the things that was noteworthy is that 6 minutes into the attack, at the 8th burst of fire, the area at stage right is mostly cleared. Thousands of concert goers have fled through 3 exits. But at stage left, which was separated by a barrier, there are people still taking cover, coming under fire there. I think that will come under scrutiny. I think there's still some information to be revealed about what happened in those early minutes, and exactly when the security officer, through the hotel dispatch, alerted authorities to the gunfire and the police response. It appears that it took 6 minutes for the police to arrive at the 31st floor and not the 32nd floor, and there will be questions about why they landed a floor below the gunfire.
Based on your timeline, what's the takeaway, you think, for other law enforcement around the country who are trying to ensure the safety and security of wide venues like the one we saw?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in.
But is there something from the timeline
conflict
about how quickly that that the police responded? Is there something differently that could have been done that you think could have prevented the casualties?
I think it's very difficult to determine from our analysis, which is really just the 10 minutes of the attack. I'm sure in the course of the investigation an analysis will come out about that, but I think it's too soon to say. There's more information will be provided inside the hotel, CCTV. I expect that more police body cam footage will come out, and we will get a fuller picture of how it all transpired.
Malachi Brown from the New York Times, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.